So let's start with this quote. Doug Wilson has written, "The sage is a man who is great in wisdom. In Scripture, and wisdom in Scripture is personified as a great lady." I just want to stop there for a minute. A sage is a man who is great in wisdom, and in Scripture, wisdom is personified as a great lady. We're going to see a wise man, and we're going to see Lady Wisdom in this book. Okay, a wise man and Lady Wisdom. So just hold that in your head. Sons are exhorted constantly to listen to Lady Wisdom. Sons are exhorted to listen to her. As we look to the first part of the book of Proverbs, the first 9 chapters, we see that wisdom is a woman who disciplines boys, who disciplines sons. When a grimly little boy needs his knuckles rapped, she is the one to do it. If he heeds wisdom in her role as the strict schoolmistress, he grows up to a certain measure of wisdom, and Lady Wisdom becomes his patroness. And when a man has grown up to wisdom, he has become a sage. Now, that might be a little confusing on the onset, but it's actually a quite brilliant statement. What he's saying here is Proverbs was written for young men, young women, for children, but in particular men first and foremost, boys who are being raised to be men. And it is being written so that they would be discipled by Lady Wisdom. Now, Lady Wisdom is not actually a person. It's wisdom personified. This is the wisdom of God, the goodness of God, the truth of God. She is discipling these children so that they don't stay boys, they become men. Every boy is a future man. Every girl is a future woman. And the Proverbs are written to disciple them. And if they will listen to Lady Wisdom's voice, we're going to see, they won't stay boys and girls. They'll become sages. They'll be wise men and wise women in the world. So, before we have to go to some random book to learn about parenting or to some book of wisdom for children, right? You've got the book of Proverbs written just for this purpose, yet often so neglected in the parenting process. Now, I like one more piece on Proverbs by a theologian named David Murray. He writes, "The book of Proverbs is the Old Testament's Twitter." Now, if you don't know what Twitter is, it's this modern social media app where you're only allowed to comment, like a couple sentences. That's it per post, which would be great. I wish they did that for Facebook and shut some of us up, okay? So there's limits on how much you can say. After some introductory chapters that present wisdom's beauty and benefits and beckonings, we encounter hundreds and hundreds of tweets, short, pithy, memorable statements and observations that communicate the most profound theological and practical truths. Listen to this. 1/3 of the book of Proverbs contains a father's addresses and appeals to his son. So it's a father speaking to a young man, trying to help him go from being a boy to a future man. Next, he says here, Israel would have read this not merely as King Solomon's words to his royal sons, but as God's words to his national son, the people of Israel. Lady Wisdom is the mediator of God's wisdom. She calls sinners on God's behalf and teaches them in God's name and points them to God for everything. When Lady Wisdom saw that Madam Folly, here's another character, Mrs. Foolish, all right, had prepared a fatal banquet for the foolish, she prepares her own feast and counters it with a gracious invitation. So now you've got a father talking to a son. You've got Lady Wisdom talking to these children. You have Madam Folly, a wicked woman, tempting these children. And you have 2 offers being made. Will your children listen to Lady Wisdom and their father, or will they listen to the wicked woman, the temptress, the seductress? All right? That is the battle that's going on in this book. This was to portray the heart of God for sinners, and it is confirmed by later prophets who pick up this picture and use it to portray God as the divine host calling sinners to fellowship with him at his dinner table, just as Jesus did portray God on earth. The Old Testament leaves us looking and longing for the wise one who would fulfill the law and the Proverbs. No surprise, Jesus Christ fits exactly that profile. We remember last week, Jesus Christ is the wisdom of God. In him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Could we turn that air off so my voice is not competing? All right. Thank you. So, this is really important when we start to think about what we're diving into tonight. So if you're following along in your notes, first off, the word proverb. What does it mean exactly? Last week we saw that wisdom is the application of knowledge. Wisdom is how you live in the world. Proverbs are wisdom statements. It's taking knowledge and applying it so that a young man and a young woman don't have to make bad decisions in life. But guess what? It's also wisdom we need as adults, too. And so one of the most godly men I ever knew was a deacon here named John Tisdale. And every day, this deacon, most of you here sadly never got to know this man, very godly man. Every day he would read a proverb, every day. And he would tell you, Pastor, I don't have a ton of book smarts. That wasn't really true. He had a lot of Bible book smarts. He said, I don't have a lot of book smarts. But the guy was so wise. And when I found out later in life, as he was very sick, he had made it a practice for many years to read a proverb every day and think on it and meditate on it. So,
and he challenged everybody. If you wasn't going to read anything else in the Bible, you read one book of Proverbs, because there's one chapter of Proverbs, there's 31 of them, so it'll take you through a full month, and then next month you start over again.
That was his challenge. Really a beautiful thing. So, tonight we want to think about how this wisdom literature can help you parents and grandparents, of course, but also how it helps our souls as well. It's good. It's wisdom. So it's not just knowledge. It's what you do with knowledge. How do you live it? How does it protect you in this world? So the word proverb in Hebrew is the Hebrew word mashal, as you see there. It means a comparison, something that's similar, a similitude, a parable compared. It's often antithetical. It's putting one idea, contrasting it with another idea to see what's true and what's not true. These are short, pithy statements that help us see darkness and light, good and evil, knowledge and foolishness, all these kind of things. So sometimes the word also has a negative connotation. If you were to look up these references, you'll see how God taunts the wicked with a proverb. And these are statements of judgment. And tonight we will notice that some of the proverbs are very positive, some of them are also very negative. Because if you don't follow wisdom, you're going to follow another path, which brings destruction, that the fool walks. And so it's important to recognize that. Now, when we're talking about the book of Proverbs, you remember there's 3 sections of the Hebrew Bible. The first section is the law, which is in Hebrew what? Pentateuch's Greek. In Hebrew, it is the what? The Torah. Okay, Genesis through Deuteronomy. The second section is not the historical books. That's in our English Bible and in the Septuagint. In the Hebrew Bible, it's the prophets, which in Hebrew is what? The Navim, the prophets. And then the third section is the writings, the Ketuvim. And we said that that was often summarized as the Psalms, because Psalms was the biggest book and the first book of that third scroll. And in this book, you're going to see here wisdom literature. So you're going to see Proverbs, Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes. So you're going to find in the Jewish Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, this in the third division. And you're going to notice that when you look in this section, that this is the section of Solomon. Now, we said Job might not have been written by Solomon. It might have been written by Job. It might have been written by Elihu. Could have been written by a scribe later. Maybe Ezra or Moses was also given by the Jews. Some people think it was written by Solomon. But definitely Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes are works of King Solomon. Which is important, since what was his prayer to God we saw last week? He prayed for the ability to discern between good and evil, right and wrong, knowledge and evil, wisdom. That's what he wanted. Now, the term wisdom, chachma in Hebrew, can have the nuance of a skill. In particular, the skill of choosing right or wrong. We call that today what? What is the synonym for that? Discernment. Wisdom is discerning between right and wrong. So two people can be presented with the two evidence and with the same exact evidence, but come up with a different plan or strategy in how to attack that evidence, correct? And sometimes the plan is absolutely foolish and damning and deadly, and the other is life-giving and blessing. And that's what wisdom is. So when we think about this idea of wisdom, it is the skill in the art of godly living. It's not just having knowledge, but it's the art of godly living. It's practicality. So what's kind of cool is that if you go back, the Psalms are the book of the worship and prayer of Israel, and then the Proverbs are the book of wisdom and application. It's the teacher's manual, if you will, of Israel. So predominantly, the book of Proverbs is about wisdom, and of course, Solomon was a wise man. What we read about him in 1 Kings chapter 4, very interestingly, we are told that God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, the breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore. His wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the peoples of the east. And this is a big statement in that time period, the wisdom of Egypt. Why is that a big statement?
Egypt had people that just did nothing to train to be wise.
They had wise men. They had astrologers. They were one of the oldest and most ancient and revered civilizations. So for him to be wiser than the wisest in Egypt kind of means something in that era. Now notice, he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Calcol, and Darda, sons of Mahol. His fame was in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs. It's an important statement. Kind of lets us know. People sat around the court. They listened to Solomon teach. They wrote down what he wrote because his words were so impactful and so wise. So again, Ben Franklin wrote Proverbs. His were not inspired by God, not always accurate. Solomon's were accurate. And he wrote over 3,000. He spoke very clearly here. So much so, notice lastly, that people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all the kings of the earth who heard of his wisdom. Because he was wise, his wisdom spread. People knew about it. And that's important to note. A wise man has a good testimony. In fact, one of the Proverbs says a good name is better to be chosen than great riches. Solomon happened to know something about that because he had great riches. But he said a good name is better. He had a good name because of the wisdom God gave him. So again, wisdom is the skill in the art of godly living. Now, while Solomon was known for 3,000 proverbs he spoke, there's only 800 in the book of Proverbs. Good news. Because when I hear 3,000, I start hyperventilating. I got to be responsible for 3,000. No, just 800. That's all. All right. How about one a day? Just start there. Don't worry about 800. Just start with one a day. And read these and talk about them in your house. Talk to them about with your kids. So we know that Solomon's career, right after King David. So David, if you remember, let's do our chronology. Haven't done it in a while. So the Exodus from Egypt was around what year? 1446 BC. Good. And King David is around what year? 1000 BC. That should be easy. 1,000 years before Jesus. And Solomon, his son, would be next. So as you see on the screen, his years were 970 to 931. He rules as king of Israel, of a united kingdom of Israel. And these proverbs are, for the most part, said to be Solomon's. Now, there's a few other names that are proposed authors, and we'll talk about them in a minute. So very clearly, you see three sections, Proverbs 1, 10, and 25. These are the Proverbs of Solomon. You'll notice in chapter 25, though, it says, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. That tells us something about the book of Proverbs. Was the book of Proverbs completed when Solomon died? No. In other words, Hezekiah, does anyone remember who King Hezekiah was? I did a whole sermon series on him last year, so be careful how you answer, because you might get in trouble with me. All right? King Hezekiah, what did he bring to the nation of Judah?
Bells.
What was that?
Bells.
Bells?
Yeah, bells. Worship of bells.
No. Be careful how you answer now. He brought revival, if you remember. He was a godly king, and he brought so he actually ran the idolatry out of the land and tore down the high places of Israel. He revived the worship of Israel. So it's kind of interesting to read here in Proverbs 25 that the men of the king of Judah, which lived long after Solomon's time, because Solomon's 970, and Hezekiah is like the 700s to the late 600s. I think he dies 686. So Hezekiah is way later, and those Proverbs weren't added to the book until Hezekiah's day. So God used Hezekiah to finish, it seems, the book of Proverbs. He was used in the finalizing of the book. And that would make sense, since there was great reform and revival in Hezekiah's day. Now, there's a few other people mentioned. There's a man named Aegor who is mentioned in Proverbs chapter 30. The words of Aegor, the son of Jacob, the oracle. Now, some of the Jewish writers think that Aegor is just another name for Solomon. And I think I might have put this quote in your notes. If not, I'll just read part of it. Some of the Jews, as Jarchi and Gersom, and likewise some Christian writers, take Aegor to be Solomon himself, because the word means a gatherer. And so the Latin Vulgate version renders it the words of the gatherer, the son of the vomiter, just as he calls himself in Ecclesiastes the Koheleth, the preacher, Ecclesiastes 1:1. The reason given is that he gathered wisdom and the law. So some people think this is a name that was a nickname for Solomon. I kind of doubt that's the case. It doesn't really seem to me to be, why wouldn't they just say the words of Solomon like they did every other time? So I think it's probably possible that this is someone who is a godly, wise man in Israel. And maybe he was a counselor in the court of the king. Maybe he was a prophet. We don't know. But the point is, God chose to preserve his words for us for sure. There's another man in Proverbs 31. The words of King Lemuel. So let's talk about that name. It's a compound word, obviously. What does half the word mean? God. El. So Lemuel means literally devoted to God, or some might translate it created by God or to God. And we don't know who this is or where he was king. So again, some people suggest that Lemuel was actually just Solomon, that this is a nickname given to him. So again, Gill writes here, the general sense of Jewish and Christian writers is that this is Solomon himself. Lemuel was a corruption of the name Solomon. I don't buy that. It was a fond, pretty name his mother, Bathsheba, gave him when he was young, and he thought to write it this way, kind of in a proverbial way or something of that nature. Ultimately, we don't know who King Lemuel was, and we don't know who Aegor is. We just don't know. Maybe it was Solomon. I think probably not. Lastly, there are some anonymous proverbs in the book. Okay? So not everything was written by Solomon. We read in Proverbs 1 and 22, these are the words of the wise. And then these statements are given. In Proverbs 24, we read about these are also the sayings of the wise. So we don't know who the authors were. We do know God was the author, right? God gave these words of wisdom. So let's look at Proverbs 1 for just a minute. We'll start there, and then we'll look at a few other things tonight as we roll. Proverbs chapter 1. Let's start right at the beginning. So the Proverbs of Solomon, 970. He begins to rule. The son of David, 1000 BC. Just trying to help you remember. The king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction. To perceive the words of understanding. Now, notice verse 3. To receive the instruction of wisdom. Not just to know it, to receive the instruction of wisdom. Justice, judgment, equity. To give prudence to the simple. To the young man, discretion and knowledge. A wise man will hear and increase in learning. A man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma. The words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Just pause there for a moment. So, it's not enough to know. You have to receive what's in Proverbs. It's not enough to have knowledge. You have to have the art of skillful living. You have to have wisdom. to be successful. And all of it, according to verse 7, has to be undergirded with what? What is the beginning of wisdom? The fear of the Lord. It has to start not here. It has to start where? Your heart. And then it lives out. It goes to your head, and it comes out in your life. Now, what's pretty cool, one of the Christian schools in town, Pensacola Christian, you walk in, one of my favorite things about the building, you walk in, you go into the main lobby, and huge on the wall there is Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Okay? I think every school should have that on the wall. And maybe our home schools and everywhere else too, right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But, what does it say also? Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So you're going to have a choice. When you read Proverbs, you're either your heart is going to receive it. You're going to fear God's word. You're going to want to walk in wisdom, the skillful art of living a godly life. Or you're going to despise what you hear. You're going to run from it. There's only two responses. Receive it in your heart or run from it. And then you begin to see the purpose of the book in verse 8. My son, hear the instruction of your father. Do not forsake the law of your mother. Now, this has probably two meanings. It probably means, my son, hear me. I'm Solomon. I'm writing to you. It may even mean, Israel, I'm your king. Hear me. I'm speaking to you. But I think it also means God is your father. Hear the instruction of your father's son. And then the same thing. Also, we read here, do not forsake the law of your mother. Why? Because mom's good at law, right? In most houses, mom's the one who lays the law down during the day, correct? Dad just comes home and maybe institutes the correction later and enforces it. But mom tends to be the real lawgiver often. And so when you read this here, yeah, there's this natural relationship. Children should listen to their mothers and honor them. But this book also is going to talk a lot about lady wisdom. Okay, so there's a secondary meaning, this lady wisdom, personified wisdom that we will discuss. So Proverbs' theme is at the beginning of the book, the fear of the Lord. Wisdom's distinct from knowledge, and in order to have wisdom, you have to fear the Lord. Just like cement without water can't produce mortar. Okay, you can play with that cement bag mix without water. It just makes you cough and makes a big mess, correct? But with water, it produces exactly what it's supposed to do. So the wise don't simply have faith in the Proverbs. The Proverbs are not good luck charms. Okay? It's not a proverb a day keeps the devil away. Or it's not like Ben Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac is going to make you wise and successful in life. Because you need the fear of the Lord. You need the water to make the cement into something that actually is solid. You've got to have the fear of the Lord. So some definitions of the fear of the Lord. Bruce Waltke has said, it is accepting by faith God's objective revelation because one believes that God intends to keep his threats as well as his promises. It's faith. God is going to keep what he says. And then Hill and Walton write, the fear of the Lord is a right relationship to God, one of obedience to his covenant stipulations that prompts right method in thought and right behavior in action. So thought, action, controlled by heart. That's the fear of the Lord. Now, one more definition about the Proverbs or the maxims of this book. Very important, this next thing. So I've heard pastors say all the time, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And I've heard pastors say that is a lock, key promise. Every godly parent will by nature have godly children. Every godly parent will always have godly children. And then, I've been living on this earth a while, and I've seen godly parents who don't have godly children. Okay? So then you have pause. Does that mean God failed or the proverb failed? No, because you're misusing the proverb. Remember, what is the key that opens the door? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Hearing the knowledge and receiving the wisdom is the key that unlocks the door. So, What are Proverbs? They are given as general principles. They are not mechanical cause and effect formulae. So, and we're going to see that tonight when we examine a few specific Proverbs that can go a lot of different ways. They declare how God normally works or responds to persons, what foolishness generally brings, and the rewards wisdom and righteousness generally lead to in this life. Principles, however, are not inflexible, but involve exceptions in their universal application. These are general principles of wisdom that we should follow. These are not promises that are lock-key, because God's sovereign. He's in control. So I'll give you a few examples of this, so we make sure we read Proverbs correctly. Proverbs 3:16. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Does everyone who is wise have long life? Can you show me that from the Bible? Does everyone who is wise have long life in the Bible? How long did Jesus live? 33 years. Okay. Did ever any godly children die in the Bible? Yes, they did. In her left hand are riches and honor. Did Lazarus in Luke 16 have riches and honor when he died and then awakened and he was in Abraham's bosom with Abraham in paradise? Not so much, right? He was poor, raggedy, and eating crumbs from the table. So, does this mean God's proverb failed? Or does it mean that that's not how we're supposed to use the Proverbs in that way? Poor is he who works with the negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Is that true most of the time? Most of the time. Can hardworking people be poor? Yeah. Why? They have a job that doesn't pay much. They don't live for money. It's not God's will for them to be rich, right? It's God's will for them to have faith. Why would God not want someone to be rich? What's that? Well, that's true. Let me define it as worldly rich. To be filthy rich. Why is it not God's will for all of us here to be millionaires? Because some of us may take the riches, and what will we do with it? We'll neglect God. We'll love money. So this is what one of the Puritans said. Religion, and the Puritans that came to America, those founding fathers, religion begot prosperity. In other words, religion, Christianity in America, had a baby named Prosperity. And the daughter devoured the mother. So, prosperity, the daughter, devoured the mother, religion or Christianity in America. That was hundreds of years ago, by the way, they said that. So I don't know what they would say today. All right, they just pray for us. So, he who walks in integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will be found out. Well, people that have integrity sometimes don't always have secure lives, do they? Not at all. In fact, people with integrity sometimes lied about and slandered and hurt. So Proverbs are not to be read like no matter what. This is not the prosperity gospel when you read Proverbs at all. These are teaching children, and then us as adults as well, the skillful life of living to the glory of God, living in wisdom, applying knowledge together. We could read many more. So one thing to point out is that, well, actually, let me read one more just for fun. So Proverbs 22:15, and we already did 6. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Is that true? 100% of the time. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. Is that always true? No, it's not. It can help. And there is a place for correction. Proper, godly, physical correction. It is a good thing if it's done in a proper, godly way, controlled way. However, is the rod of correction a surefire to make every kid behave? Of course it's not. Because some of us in here had our bottoms beat way too much. And we still messed up. We still blew it, right? So, yes, these are principles, guiding principles. They are not promises that are 100%. They are principles of wisdom that should be followed. So, here's an example of this. Now, I like this one. A lot of people quote verse 4 I've heard verse 4 quoted so much in the church without realizing that verse 5 is in Proverbs. And I always like to read back verse 5 to them just to mess with them when they quote verse 4. So what does it say? Answer not a fool according to their folly, their foolishness, lest you be like him yourself. That means don't go down into the muck and roll around in the mud with the pig. Okay? Don't answer a fool according to their foolishness on their own level. However, verse 5 says, answer a fool according to his folly, his foolishness, lest he be wise in his own eyes. What? You just said not to. Well, there are times where we have to put people in their place in a godly way. We can't let their foolishness continue. You have to draw the line and stop. But there are some people that are so far gone that you can't reason with them. You can't deal with them. So how do you apply these kind of proverbs? Well, the time, the place, and the person involved is how you apply it. That takes wisdom. That takes discernment. That's why you need this book. So you have wisdom and discernment. And you know how to apply these truths. Now, the only exception of this is when God is involved in Proverbs. The only time that there's not definites is when God is involved. So, for example, maybe the most famous of all, Proverbs 3, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, he will direct your path. That's a proverb universal, right? He will direct your path universally. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Turn away from evil. Universal. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Universal. Always happens. 100% of the time. Why? It's about God. But remember, most proverbs are actually about wisdom. They're not about God. So there are some about God. The majority are about wisdom, walking in a godly way, using knowledge for good. There's also a lot of proverbs that are about things like drunkenness and gluttony and envy and greed and about the poor and about work ethic. Those things are all 100% true, but the promises therein contained are general maxims that we should consider and recognize this is the normal thing that happens and this is our goal. So, just like the Beatitudes, right? The Beatitudes of Jesus are wisdom literature. They're Proverbs. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. What happens to the meek today alive? They get ran over. Yeah, eaten alive. But they will inherit the earth one day. Right? God will be faithful to his word. All right? He's not going to fail us in the promise. But it's about when it happens. That's different. So we have to remember these kind of contrasts. So a quick type of overview of the book. All right, you have the first collection of Proverbs, chapter 1 to 9, which are by Solomon. And then if you jump in your Bibles, go to chapter 10 for a minute. And all of a sudden in chapter 10, we get a new introduction. Okay, it just pops up. It's kind of weird because it's like, these have been the Proverbs of Solomon, and then all of a sudden in chapter 10, it just says again, when you get there, and it's a very similar introduction, by the way, to Proverbs chapter 1, you'll notice. The Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son makes a glad father, a foolish son is the grief of his mother. Wait a minute, didn't we read that in chapter 1, just said a little different way, about listening to your father, follow the law of your mother? Same thing, said again. And then, when you get to chapter 22, verse 17, turn there, it seems like the book's added to again. Okay? So, when you pick up in 22:17 to 24:22, there seems to be in the Hebrew text kind of a shift that is made. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and applies your heart to my knowledge. So now he's going to start giving us the words of the wise, not his words that are spoken of. And they're written in a different way. And then when you get to chapter 24, kind of a similar occurrence happens again. Verses 23 and 24. These things also belong to the wise. And then all of a sudden he starts telling us more proverbs that are different. And then the fifth collection starts in chapter 25, verse 1 again. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. And then in chapter 30, you've got Aegor, and 31, you've got King Lemuel. It is interesting that chapter 30 and chapter 31, the book ends with Hezekiah, Aegor, Lemuel. That tells me that most of Proverbs was probably put together during Solomon's lifetime, and those sections were added later, maybe by King Hezekiah and his men. So in the 700s to the 686, somewhere in there, that's when the book was completed under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Now, that's just a simple outline to think about. If I was to read through Proverbs sectionally, these would be the sections of the book. You could find 7 sections or collections. So I want to talk about a few of the characters of the book. Look back at Proverbs chapter 1 for a minute. And then I want to look at Proverbs chapter 8. Proverbs chapter 1. I want to start with the first introduction to wisdom personified. Okay? Proverbs chapter 1, verse 20. It starts out, and this is what it says here. Wisdom calls aloud outside. She raises her voice in the open squares. Notice, wisdom is being personified. It's not an it. It's not something you acquire. It's a she, which is a compliment to the female race, the female gender, just to say, right? She raises her voice in the open square. She cries out in the chief concourses. At the opening of the gates in the city, she speaks her words. How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? All the way down to verse 33, whoever listens to me will dwell safely and will be secure without fear of evil. So, this Lady Wisdom in the book is someone who's going to speak to the sons. She's going to say, you need to not just know knowledge, you need to receive me. Which, by the way, don't we say you don't just need to have knowledge about Christ, you need to what? You've got to receive him. You have to know him, right? So now turn to chapter 8 for a minute. There's another beautiful description of wisdom. Chapter 8 is wisdom talking again, Lady Wisdom. And this is a really beautiful section indeed. Now, we can't read all of chapter 8. I wish we could. But we'll just pick up at verse 22. Now, what's kind of cool about this is when you read this, it sounds a lot like John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All things were made by him. Without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and life was the light of men. Here, 8:22. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I have been established from what? Everlasting. From the beginning, before there was ever an earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth. While as yet he had not made the earth or the fields or the primal dust of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep. When he established the clouds above. When he strengthened the fountains of the deep. When he assigned to the sea its limits, so that the waters would not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth. By the way, doesn't this sound a lot like Job? Remember when we were studying Job, when God was speaking there? Sounds a lot like it. Then I was beside him as a master craftsman. I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his inhabited world. And my delight was with the sons of men. So let me just stop there for a minute. Some people think this is talking about the wisdom of God personified. Okay? Others read this kind of a text and read this as referring to Jesus' incarnation. Not to his pre-existence, but him coming in the flesh. In the flesh, he could say these things as the one in whom is hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. The point here is, either way, whether this is talking about Jesus in the flesh, who could look back and say he had all wisdom, he was creator of all, he was there, or whether this is just talking about wisdom as in God, right, who has all wisdom, is wisdom. One of his attributes is wisdom. Remember, God's attributes, just break this down, are not really attributes. So what are the attributes of God? Throw a few of them out. What was that? Yeah, his aseity. He's unchangeable. What else? He's omnipresent. He's everywhere. What else? He's omnipotent. He's all-powerful. Easier ones. He's what? No, that's good. No, I'm just looking. I want an easier one for a reason. God is love. But God is also wrath and just. Now, those are not really attributes. God is not partially love and partially just, partially omnipotent, partially unchanging. God doesn't have attributes. He has, by the way, one of the attributes, wisdom. He's wise, the all-wise God. See, God actually does not have the attribute of wisdom. He has the perfection of wisdom. He is 100% wise. He is 100% loving, but he's also 100% just. He's 100% wrath, but he's also 100% omnipresent everywhere and 100% omnipotent. Plus, he is present locally, 100%, as well as being present everywhere. That's what makes him God and not like us. That's what makes him holy. He's different than us. So it's really a misnomer to say these are the attributes of God. These are actually the perfections of God. Good theologians have said over the years. Attributes is okay, perfections is better. Because we have attributes. We're made in the image of God. Jesus is God. He is the very form of God. Right? He has these things perfectly. So when you read this here about wisdom, Jesus is God and his wisdom is superior to the wisdom of Solomon. I think that's the point Solomon's trying to make. I have wisdom. I'm trying to give you wisdom. Jesus is wisdom. God is wisdom. Perfect. Listen to God. Listen to his word. And there is so many amazing wisdom statements in this book that we could talk about. So, for instance, there's so much I would love to cover, but we can't. Go to Proverbs 6 for a minute. Because we got to get through the whole Testament by the end of the year. That is why. Oh, I wish we could. So, Proverbs 6, turn there. And if we start a series in Proverbs, you all die with me in Proverbs. Because that's how long it would take to go verse by verse through Proverbs with me. But I would love to do the themes one day for sure. So Proverbs 6. Look at verse 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, and gathers her food in the harvest. Next verse should be spoken to everyone in Generation Z to millennial generation. Okay? How long will you slumber, O you sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So will your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. Okay, what is the point of this? What is it trying to tell us? Don't be lazy. Now, here's the thing. Can lazy people be rich? They are all the time, for a lot of different reasons. But the general principle is Christians are not called to be lazy. They're called to be hard workers, to be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding, right? Working. Turn to Proverbs chapter 7. Remember, chapter 8's Lady Wisdom. Proverbs 7 is Lady Harlot. Okay? She's Lady World. She's not a very nice lady. Again, if you have daughters, you need to read them Proverbs 7 and say, don't be this woman. And if you have sons, you need to read them Proverbs 7 and you need to say, stay away from this woman. Okay? That's why it's there. This is not metaphorical. All right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of Proverbs 7 women in the world, and there's a lot of men that like Proverbs 7 women in the world. And that's why there's a lot of heartache in the world. So, look at chapter... And by the way, did Solomon know anything about this? Unfortunately, by experience, he knew a little about this. And he could write these words for us. My son, keep my words and treasure my commands within you. He begins. Jump down now and look at verse 7. I saw among the simple, I perceived among the youth, a young man devoid of understanding. Passing along the street near her corner, he took the path to her house in the twilight in the evening, in the black and dark night. By the way, if you're a parent and you have teenagers and you let them just go and spend time in together's rooms unaccounted for, you're a fool according to Proverbs, just to let you know. Because guess what teenagers do in rooms by themselves with closed doors, okay? Doesn't take a rocket scientist. If you let teenagers go off in the dark and you think they're just going to go have a long conversation and come back and everything's going to be okay, you are more than naive. According to Proverbs, you're a fool. So look at verse 10. There a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. At times she was outside, at times in the open square, lurking at every corner. She called him and kissed him. With an impudent face, she said to him, I have peace offerings with me. I've paid my vows. I came to meet you, diligently to seek your face. I've come to find you. I could keep reading on and on. There's kids in the room. I'm not going to. All right? This is describing the woman you don't want. And she's going to be profiled. Look how it ends in verse 27. Her house is the way to hell. Ouch. Okay? This is not the house you want to build. You don't want to build a family, a house with her. Okay? You're just going to have woes and misery if you do. You jump to chapter 9, though, and it begins, Wisdom has built her house. You want to build a house with Lady Wisdom, not with Lady Harlot. Okay? That's a good idea. Find a Lady Wisdom, not a Lady Harlot. So there's just so many things in this book we could cover if we wanted to. When you go to Proverbs 14, the wise woman builds her house, the foolish person tears it down. Practical living. Turn to Proverbs 15. I'm just going to do one more because I'm really out of time, which I hate. So we got to pray. Proverbs 15, verse 1. You want to talk practical? This probably, for me as a pastor, as a parent, as a human, one of the most easy, practical Proverbs. Get this in your heart. It'll save you a lifetime of woe. Okay? A soft answer turns away wrath. Strong words stir up anger. Okay? Someone comes at you angry. Your kid's freaking out on you. Your coworker's losing it on you. Your family member's losing it on you. We have to be under control. Or what are we going to do? Dump gasoline on a fire. Soft answers turn away wrath. Now, is that 100% true? Some people are so far gone sometimes. What do you have to do? Your soft answer is what? Out. But we should try to have self-control. Soft answer slows down wrath. Strong words. If you give fire to fire, and what does the world say? Give fire with fire, right? Answer fire with fire. Guess what happens? Everyone gets burned. Okay? Ask people in jail why they're in jail when they committed crimes of violence or passion. And they'll tell you, because I answered fire with fire. Not because I had a soft answer and turned away wrath. That little verse right there is $100 million of parenting and Christian life value if you can apply it. Just one Proverbs. There's problems about drunkenness. There's problems about lust. There's problems about work ethic. There's problems about business. There's problems about purity. I mean, there are Proverbs about everything that you will ever face in life. There's 150 chapters in the Psalms to deal with every human emotion and condition. There's 31 chapters in Proverbs to deal with every type of situation you're going to find yourself in. And 800 Proverbs to help you navigate life. Now, last thing to say. Kind of cool. Proverbs 31 ends with who? The virtuous woman. Now, I want to back up for a minute and show you something. Oh, of course I did that. So, Proverbs 31 ends with the virtuous woman. Now, the next book in our Bibles is the book of Ecclesiastes. However, that is not the next book in the Hebrew Bible. So, the next book in the Hebrew Bible, I want you to notice, is the book of what? Ruth. So, Ruth comes right after Proverbs. Proverbs ends with a virtuous woman. The next book of the Bible is a virtuous woman. Do you want to understand what a virtuous woman looks like in Proverbs? Read the book of Ruth. And you'll learn what a virtuous woman is. Okay? Pretty cool little detail. We're out of time.